What's up, leader, and welcome to episode number 361 of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Bevere Advisors. We're also recording live from the new Return.com studio. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll enjoy our content and become a subscriber. Know that you can also watch all of our episodes over on our YouTube channel as well, so make sure you're subscribed there at L3 Leadership. And as always, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while and it's made a difference in your life, it would mean the world to me if you would leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever app you listen to podcasts through. That really does help us to grow our audience and reach more leaders, so thank you in advance for that. Well, leader, in today's episode, you'll hear my conversation with Lisa Bevere. If you're unfamiliar with Lisa, let me just tell you a little bit about her. She is a wife, and more specifically, she is a wife to John Bevere, who we interviewed a few episodes ago, and they have a world-changing ministry called Messenger International, and they have an incredible app that I'd encourage you to download. You'll hear Lisa talk about that in the episode, but literally, their ministry has gone all over the earth, and if you're not familiar with John and Lisa Bevere, you need to be. She's also a mother, a godmother, a speaker, and a New York Times best-selling author. And in our conversation, you'll hear Lisa talk about ministry and calling, so much insight into this, raising kids, leadership, and her message to women in today's world. And I absolutely think you're going to love Lisa and love our conversation. But before we dive into that, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Bevere Advisors. The financial advisors at Bevere Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Bevere Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at beretongueadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Bevere Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. And my wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers and had an incredible experience. And not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, for every couple that comes in engaged, they give them a book to help them prepare for marriage. And we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And I also want to thank our new sponsor, Return.com. And leader, let me just ask you this. Have you ever had an interest in investing in real estate? Well, now for as little as $500, you can become a commercial real estate investor. Just visit Return.com to learn more. That's REITURN.com. Investing involves risk. Please consult the Return Offering Circular if you're interested in investing. And with all that being said, let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with Lisa Bevere. Well, hey, Lisa Bevere, welcome to the L3 Leadership Podcast. I'm so excited that you're here. I've been following you and John's ministry for many, many years now, and you've both impacted my life deeply. And I had the honor of interviewing John last week, and so getting you both within a 2-week period is pretty special. But I would love to just start talking to you about the subject of calling and obedience. It's really, really special to see how God is using you and John throughout your lives and where in the season of life you're in now. But I'm curious, when it comes to calling and obedience and the journey that got you to where you are today, what would you say about that?
Well, I guess first I have to ask you, where do you see me at today? Like when you say where you are today, like what are you referring to?
I was going to say in Franklin, Tennessee. But yes, no, I just think that, you both started. For me, it's always interesting to learn people's journey, because I think if people just saw you from afar, they see what you're doing with Messenger International, they see best-selling authors, they see, God using you to impact literally hundreds of thousands of lives in many, many countries. And it's just like, wow. But I think a lot of times people miss the journey of the small little obedience decisions that we make in our lives early on that ultimately get us to where we're going. And so, yeah, I guess I'm just curious, take us through your journey when it comes to obedience and faithfulness.
I don't know what John told you, but he is the one who led me to the Lord on Purdue's campus. I was a complete heathen, completely dissatisfied with my life, thinking there has to be something more. And John invited me to a Bible study picnic. It was incredibly uncomfortable. This was a time period where people were singing songs like, I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. And as an angry heathen, I just wanted to start punching people and run out and get drunk. But I remember I looked down at the song sheet because, again, people are like raising their hands. And I'm like, Do you have a question? I mean, I'm in college. You put your hand up, that means you have a question. So I was very confused. And I saw this line, Doug, in the next song. It was called Rose of Righteousness, that said, when God looked at me, he would no longer see me, he would see Jesus. And I had such a revelation of my sin, of shame. And I just knew that I needed a covering. I knew that I had no righteousness, that I had, well, I didn't even know the concept of holiness, but I remember I just began to say, I don't know how to come to a place of a right relationship with God. And so that night, John took me walking on the campus at Purdue. He shared the spiritual laws with me through Campus Crusade. I got born again. He said, now you're saved. I said, what does that even mean? And he said, it means you're whole again, spirit, soul, and body. And I'm pretty sure at the time I said, well, so you're saying I can have cheese now? He was like, what? And I said, you said whole, spirit, soul, and body. I'm Italian. I can't eat cheese. If this Christian thing's even better than I knew it was. And he was like, oh my gosh, God, if you can save this heathen, you can heal her. And so I got born again, healed, and called into the ministry basically on our very first date. The next morning I was making my bed, and Doug, I'll back up a little bit. I spent quite a bit of time looking for the book of Paul that night. There was a Way New Testament in my Purdue College dorm room. And I kept thinking, okay, he kept saying, Paul said this, Paul said that. There must be a book of Paul. So I was like looking like, there, please, open it up to the book of Paul. And thought I had found the only book of Paul, Corinthians. I found out much later there was a lot of writings of Paul in the New Testament. But the next morning, I was making my bed in the dorm, and I heard, the man you were with last night is your husband. Wow. I've called you to be the wife of a minister. And I didn't even know, what that looked like. I had been raised loosely Catholic. Catholic for us meant before you got on an airplane, you went to confession. Before Easter, you went to confession. So it was very much a sin consciousness. Jesus was on the cross. You didn't bother him. You went to Mary. So I had kind of never had a living, vibrant relationship. I had a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of sin. And so I got in 1981, that happened. And I did not know what that looked like. So that's kind of the beginning. We get married. You find out, okay, we should have listened to the premarital counselors. We thought because God put us together, we'd never have any problems. First 4 years of our marriage looked like WWF wrestling. Italian, I'm Sicilian. It was like the clash of the Titans. And we were like, maybe we need to do this God's way. Maybe we need to step back a little bit and begin to pursue being one. And, one of the things for me that was the turning point, because you're asking about a journey, I was working full time and John was working part time during that time. And I had had my first baby. And I remember I was so stressed out that almost every night I would either take a bath or a shower just to relax down my shoulders. I was just like this. And I was in the shower and I had this sense of God asking me, he said, you don't think John's a very good head of the household, do you? And I thought, I know he's not. He said, you can do it better. And I thought, I am doing it better. He said, it's a yoke to you, but it's a mantle to John. Throw it off your shoulders. Wow. And I remember running out of the shower, crying and telling my husband, I thought submission meant that when I agreed with you, I did whatever you said. But if I disagreed, I argued with you and then reminded you how I didn't want to do it after there was a failure. And I said, I just want to be one again. And I think a lot of times people don't understand that submission is two people committed to the same mission. And I didn't understand submission means under assignment. So you submit to the people that you were under assignment with. So I was definitely under the assignment of my husband. he, as the head of the household, and again, John and I believe that authority is for protection, direction, and provision. We do not believe authority is for domination or manipulation or control or intimidation. Jesus is the head of the church, and he says, all right, I'm going to lead, but we have to choose to follow. So submission does not mean you don't have a choice.
That's so good. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. Actually, I was just listening to a message by a man named Keith Moore, and he was just saying, when we're instructed to submit and husbands are instructed to love their wives, like God is talking to the wives and to the husbands. He's not saying husbands force your wives into submission, or it's a choice. It's a mutual choice for both of you to do that. I think that is so good. So you get to a place in your marriage where you finally are mutually submitting to one another. You're submitting to John's leadership. What took place after that, as far as your journey from working full time, now you're a mom, to you guys actually entering into ministry?
Yeah. So it was about a month after that John quit his job. I quit my job, and he became a youth pastor. And I remember when John became a youth pastor, I watched my husband go from a boy to a man when I stopped being his mother and I started to be his wife. And I think a lot of people don't understand that you can speak to the little boy or you can speak to the prince. You can speak to the man he is becoming, or you can criticize the man he is not yet. And, I don't know about you, Doug, but I grew up with crazy people. I grew up with people that were divorced multiple times. My grandmother had, my grandmother was married 4 times. My parents were married, divorced, remarried, divorced again. I had never seen the power of actually building other people up with your words. I only knew the power of intimidation, control, disrespect, manipulation. So John becomes a youth pastor. I'm staying home. I'm raising our one child. I get pregnant with our second son. And John starts to put a little bit of pressure on me. He starts saying, Lisa, these young girls need you. And I say, oh, no, listen, I'm not some package deal. Just because you're the youth pastor doesn't mean I have anything to say to these young girls. Truth is, I was scared of the youth girls. I'm like, I am scared of 15-year-old girls. I was probably 28, 29 at the time. I was terrified of them. And John just kept saying, you need to be prepared. I'm going to have you share tonight. And I'd be like, no, you need to be prepared. I'm going to run out the back of the building. And it was so funny, Doug, because the scriptures that a lot of people use to hold women down and keep them silent in the church, I was like, I need to be silent in the church. I am not getting up there. And my husband would just say, you know what, Lisa, you're not your own. You were bought with a price. And you don't have the right to be comfortable when so many people are hurting. And I would get so mad. I would say, don't you talk to me like I'm a congregation. I am your wife. You need to feel sorry for me. And there were some reasons I thought, well, this is too hard. I had lost an eye to cancer when I was 5. I did not have a great moral life before I became a Christian. I was like, I'm trying to hide my past, not redeem it. And so anyway, John was always that one that would say, I believe that you have something to say and you need to say it. And then, so I posted Bible studies in my house for our youth girls. I would talk for maybe 3 minutes under protest. John forced me to do one of the College of Career nights, and he didn't tell anybody. He said it was going to be a surprise guest speaker. And when I was sitting in the back, and he did a video, and he said, "This is my favorite person in the world that's going to minister tonight," and maybe half to 3/4 of our group walked out because I was a female.
Wow.
So I remember I was pregnant with Austin when that happened. So Austin is 31, 32. So that's kind of the first time people were like, I'm not sitting under a woman. And I was like, okay, I want to leave too. And then that night, some men jumped the fence at my house, pounded on our bedroom window. My husband was out of the country. just in case I did not understand how important it was that women do not get in the pulpit.
That's crazy. So, I want to talk about women in leadership, but take us through that journey. Clearly, you kept going. But yeah.
Well, I remember John came home and I told him, I said, do you understand? You put me at risk. Do you understand what happened? Do you understand this is why I should never do this? And he just said to me, Lisa, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happened. I'm sorry I wasn't here when that happened. I'm sorry that you felt so vulnerable and afraid, but I'm not going to let you quit because too many young girls need your voice. So, it's kind of this crazy thing, Doug, and I don't really know how to deal with some of what I see. I didn't ever think, oh, I want to preach. Oh, I want to write a book. Oh, I want to have influence. Oh, I want to be popular. Oh, I want to have a platform. It was kind of thrust on me. And I think that it was out of default that I obeyed. It was a really long time before I did a mixed crowd, though. Again, I think I might have shared a teeny bit at youth retreats or something with my husband, but it wasn't until probably 2007 before I ever did a service where men were present.
Wow. Well, I'm glad for John's voice in your life. One, just to get your voice out there, because clearly you have something to say and God's used you significantly. And I'm glad you didn't quit. I'm glad you kept going. There's so much I want to unpack there. I guess just what I really want to get to is interesting. I asked John a similar question of, how did you guys get to where you are? And he actually responded very similarly. Hey, I wasn't seeking the platform. I wasn't seeking being a best-selling author. It seems like it's obviously the same in your life. He basically just kept going to his new book, right? Being in awe of God. And basically, if you'll just follow the plan of God for your life, let him take care of that. And so can you just take that context and just encourage the next generation? We have a lot of next generation leaders listening to this. And I think, again, we live in a world, and even the generation ahead of us, I think, had this a little bit of, they are seeking the platform. They are seeking the influence. They want 10,000 TikTok followers. What would your advice when it comes to, just obeying and being faithful to what God puts in your hand now? What would you say to that generation?
Well, I'm going to pose a question for them that God posed to me. He said to me, Lisa, what do you want? Do you want to be popular or do you want to be influential? And I knew the correct answer, and this is before the term influencer was used. I knew the correct answer was influential, but I wasn't sure why that was the correct answer. And so I looked up the meaning of the two words. And it's interesting. Popular means common. Popular means trendy, which means they can love you one day and hate you the next. That influential means powerful. And so at the end of the day, I think all of us have to choose, do we want to be influential and great in the sight of God, or popular and great in the sight of man? Because, and I love that you talked to John about the fear of the Lord. There's two opposing fears right now. There's the fear of man and there's the fear of God. And the fear of God is how we deal with the fear of man. And right now, if you want to be popular, you're going to find yourself ensnared with the fear of man. And I was actually watching something on the news last night, and I thought, wow, 2020, yes, it's when the pandemic started. But the real pandemic, in my opinion, that started in 2020 was the fear of man. People afraid, if I don't say this, if I don't virtue signal, if I don't stand on this side, if I don't make my opinions known, if I'm not constantly out there saying, I still can remember even my social media was run by some young people, and they're like, oh my gosh, everybody's doing this. You've got to put this up right now. And I was like, what am I putting up? Just let us do it. And then afterwards, I just said, what is going on? And constantly inundating everybody with a shaking of everybody's opinion. You could lose popularity. You could lose control. And yet John and I started, and this is something that I'm actually really excited about what I'm hearing about some of the revivals that are happening because they opened up with repentance. It opened up that revival. I heard it started with a young man saying, "This is what's going on in my life, and this is what I don't want." And yet we've got the religious Pharisees over here saying, "Well, are they preaching the whole gospel?" Well, I'm going to tell you this. It took Jesus 3 years to preach the whole gospel, and then he had to die on the cross. So, I mean, I want to be really careful because the Pharisees were attacking what God was doing while they were defending what he had done. And sometimes we get so confused that God wants to do a new thing. And if we are pandering to people, which I'm going to just say in 2020, I feel like I actually did some of that just because I thought, oh, this is, and I got caught up in this whirlwind. And then I kind of stepped back and I thought, no, you know what? I am not going to live by the dictates of people. I am not going to play to an audience that I don't even know. John and I are old enough, and he gets mad at me for saying that, but he's 64 this year and I'm 63 this year. And in our early 20s, before we ever had kids, we had the privilege of hosting a man I was actually terrified of. He was in his 80s. He was gruff. He was really like angry kind of guy, I thought, but he loved John and I. And he took us out to breakfast and he said, "I'm going to tell you some things I've seen coming on the earth." And we're like, okay. He said, "I see a day coming where people's lives will be controlled by a box they hold in their hands." This was probably 1983 or 1984. And we thought, bless him, he's senile. When people's lives be controlled by a box they hold in their hands? But that's exactly what's going on with the phones.
Yeah.
People want acknowledgement, or, they're allowing strangers to wound them. And strangers to, and my personality is, I'm just going to say this, Doug, if I put something up there that I've prayed about, and I feel like the Lord is saying, you need to say this, and somebody comes and says, take it down, it just makes me want to post it again. I'm like, I'm not going to cave. And again, we're just going to have to decide that we are going to love God. And I just don't want to be the old guard that attacks the new thing.
Yeah. That's so good. You mentioned you're in your early 60s. I want to ask you about stewarding what God gives you. Obviously, God has increased the influence that he's given you and John over the years. You're certainly not at the end of your journey, but you're much further ahead than probably most of the listeners on this. I'm always interested in leaders making it to their finish line and actually, fulfilling and finishing the ministry that God gave to them. And I'm sure in your times of ministry, you've seen a lot of leaders start, but I'm sure you saw a lot fizzle out and fall. What advice would you give to leaders when it comes to stewarding what God gives them and protecting themselves so that they can make it to their finish lines of ministry?
Yeah, that's probably a question we get more than any other question. And I think it's so important. First and foremost, John and I did have the privilege of watching a lot of people start out smart and end up stupid. And I think we watched our pastor, who we had the utmost respect for at the time, we watched him crash and burn. And there were a couple elements that were involved. Number one, pride. When people think that they play by different rules, when people begin to think that the anointing of God on their life to minister is the approval of their private life, they always are going to get in trouble. And so character is a really big deal to God. And we don't always celebrate character. Who I am in private is actually more important to God than who I am in the pulpit. Because most of the failures don't happen in the pulpit. They happen in private. And so when John and I saw three ministers that we loved and respected, one after another, just go down a path of foolishness. I remember we called some older people and we said, hey, listen, never saw that coming for that person. What do we do? And they said, you're going to have to surround yourself with people who will ask you the questions you don't want to answer and tell you the things you don't want to hear. He said, you're going to have to get people who are not afraid to confront you. And for John and I, we invited a couple people, 3 people on our board right away. And I remember they said to us, listen, we don't care how many books you sell. We don't care about how many speaking engagements you have. They said, we're going to actually ask your children how you're doing.
Wow.
And so when we would have a board meeting, these board members would take out our oldest son and his wife and say, okay, your parents are saying they're doing great. What do you think? And I mean, some people might say that sounded like an invasion of our life, but the truth is, I don't want to be that minister that oh yeah, she wrote a bunch of books, but then she ran off with somebody or I don't want that to be the end of my story. I don't want that. And we have children that are better humans than us. We have all 4 of our sons. They're doing marriage better than we did it. They're doing parenting better than we did it. And I'm happy about that. And at the end of the day, I'm happier about my children than I am about book sales. And, it's so funny. When I get to talk, I say, hey guys, I have a New York Times bestselling book. And of course, that's kind of the ultimate, if you have a New York Times. And I say, do you know what happens when you have a New York Times? And everybody's like, I said, absolutely nothing. You don't get an email. You like your publisher might make up, like I have something, it's over there from my publisher where they're like, congratulations. I said absolutely nothing. And I said, when I stand before Jesus, he's not going to say, well done, Lisa. I'm so proud of the books you sold. He's going to say, I'm excited about the books you sowed. And, to that end, we give away more books every year than we sell. And so I just think that heaven has a very different economic structure than we have. And so we're going to have to figure out and align ourselves with heaven's approach on things.
Yeah. Well, I love that you gave your board permission to do that. And I've never heard of anyone saying, let's ask their kids how they're doing. I think that's so brilliant. Amazing? Oh, well, yeah. I'm like,
we worked with all 4 of our sons. So they knew, and they would say things like, Lisa, you got to stop disagreeing with John in front of your team. Or John, you've got to stop like railroading things over Lisa and the boys. You're not being respectful. I mean, they would call us out on things.
Yeah.
And they also told we had to have a counselor. We were like, but we're not fighting. And they're like, no, you need tools. They said every season of life. And again, you talked about seasons. Every season of life requires different tools. And so if you are trying to build empty nest season without tools, because I mean, the truth is it can be children, survival mode. And then all of a sudden, if you haven't built your marriage, when the kids leave, that's why so many people end up getting divorced, because they never built their marriage relationship.
Well, yeah, so much I want to unpack there. I do want to dive in. I wanted to ask you about family. I believe you guys just celebrating 40 years of marriage, which is incredible. Is that correct?
We're on our 41st year. Last year we hit 40. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's amazing. You've raised incredible kids who, like you said, are all, walking with God.
They're
and
men
doing
now.
great.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's, I'm a parent of 4. I have 2 girls, 2 boys, 6 and under. So it's a little wild in the Smith house right now.
It is.
But talk to us, if you had to sit down and have coffee with my wife and I, and you could tell us 3 things that would set us up for, raising kids who will stand in awe of God and walk with him, what would you tell us?
Well, first of all, I would say your children are going to follow what you model, not what you say. And my mother, I'm not laughing because of this next thing. My mother-in-law, our last living parent just died, and the sons were all here in town together and making fun of me about catching me worshiping. And they were saying that they were playing old school worship music, and they were talking about, Doug, I'm still not 100% sure this happened. I know a lot, but they said that they thought I had a prayer shawl. I said, I have never owned a prayer shawl in my entire life. But they were like, she was dancing and she was worshiping, and we came home from school early and we caught our mom worshiping. Well, there's a lot of things they could have got me doing. I'm glad it was worshiping. So my kids saw me worshiping God with complete abandon. They saw John every single day reading the word and praying. First thing, John is your consistent, disciplined person. I was the kind of free-spirited gypsy worship person, so it was kind of like if one child wasn't John, they could be me. And then the other thing is, we brought them into everything. And so the modeling and bringing them into everything. But I guess the biggest thing is, and I'm sure John would have said this to you, was when we made mistakes, we owned it. I want to say it was about 6 years ago, but it could have been a little bit longer or a little shorter. My husband sat down with my boys, and Addison was married at the time, and the other ones weren't yet. And he said, you guys, I needed to pioneer and travel for a while, but I did it longer than I should have. And he said it was easier to be on the road than at home. And I need to ask you to forgive me. And, I just feel like, my boys weren't like, what? No, they knew that there was a season where he needed to do it. And then there was a season where it was easier to do it. And I feel like God has granted us length of days with our sons because of John's humility and vulnerability in some of that. And, there are also some people that say you never should fight in front of your kids. Well, we did in front of our kids, but we also resolved it in front of the kids. So if they were part of the conflict, they were also part of the solution. And that could be really embarrassing sometimes, as the only female in the house. Let's just talk about what that might look like. They would all look at each other like, is she on her period? I'm like, no, that's not it. And then it really was it. So there were times where I would kind of leave the room, come back in, and then I would say something like, how I was just so disrespectful with your dad? And they would be like, yes. And they say, that was wrong. They'd say, well, we knew that. And then John would say, how I was really harsh with your mom? And they'd say, yes. And he said, that was wrong. They said, well, we knew that too. We're glad you guys know that. And we did play with our kids a lot. I probably gave you 5 things. But
I love it.
We were very organic with it. We played games with them a lot. We did family movie night. We would talk if something came up in the movie that we're like, we would talk to our kids about it. Like, hey guys, I'm not talking about sexual things. I'm just like, what might have hit you wrong on that? And developed a lot, with our children. We did dinner every single night as a family. And I think it's an Italian thing.
I think it's a beautiful practice. same question, only when it relates to marriage. I love how you talked about, you had to prepare for empty nesters because a lot of people don't. My wife and I, as I said, 4 kids under 6, we're in that season where, we're doing our best to have date nights and stay focused. But man, so much of our time and energy is on the kids and probably rightfully so. But, what advice would you give to parents in the thick of parenting to really invest in their marriage so when they are empty nesters, they're thriving instead of on empty?
Yes. Well, I know that for John and I, we would do things like, okay, let's try to get all the kids to bed by a such and such time so that we could just have some sanity time before we went to bed. And, date nights, I know date nights are really important for us. Sometimes date nights just meant we walked around the block while our kids were in the house because we either afford a babysitter or we just, we're just walking. Like mom and dad, we need to go for a walk.
That's good.
We found things that were commonalities. John and I are very different. My very favorite thing to do in the entire world is read. And John he had a learning disability. Reading is very difficult for him, so we had to find things that were commonalities to talk about stuff. One of the things we've been doing as empty nesters is we'll watch something kind of like a lunch and learn, but it's dinner, and we'll discuss it. Like we were watching a series by Dr. Jordan Peterson. We watched some of his thing on Exodus. Then we watched some of, somebody else's on marriage, and we'll just talk through. I think having a constant posture of learning. And then, I remember the kids zone where you just go to bed and you're just so tired. I think affirming to the other person that I love you and I would love to be up for having sex with you, but can we just maybe find each other in the middle of the night because I'm just too tired? And just constantly telling each other that we loved each other, that we were for each other, and trying to make moments happen. But, John and I love to ride bicycles together. He's trying to cook now, which has been interesting because I feel like he's kind of coming into my zone. But we do cooking together, and it's been fun.
Yeah. Well, I know one of your top passions is investing in women, and with the time that we have, I'm just going to leave this open ended, and then we can see where it goes. But what are you seeing with just women in the kingdom today? What's your message to women? Really open, and what are you seeing? Yeah.
So I've never seen the concept of womanhood more under attack than it is right now. I watch how, in my opinion, feminists have distorted what it means to be a woman. For a long time, women have believed if they want to be powerful women, they need to act like men. But do we think men who act like women is a position of power? I think that we need to understand that the concept of femininity and womanhood is under attack because Jesus is coming back for a bride. And so if I was the enemy, I would distort marriage. I would distort femininity. We have culture sexualizing what it means to be a woman, and the church silencing its daughters. That is a horrible combination, silence and sexualization. And so what we need to be able to do is be those women who understand the power of having a female voice. I do believe that women were created to have a voice. There are the people that would say, oh, in the Garden of Eden, Adam should have shut down Eve. Well, no, that wasn't the problem. Adam and Eve both should have used their voice on the serpent and said, it is written. They should have done what Jesus did. It wasn't about Eve not having a voice because it was God who said, it's not good for man to be alone. So obviously God wanted Eve to, or the woman to come out of the man, that the two could be one, but one doesn't equal same. So there are things for women to speak to, and there are things for men to speak to, but the enemy has said, no, yell at each other. And so I feel like we need to restore what God is doing. We need mothers in the house of God. We need fathers in the house of God. We don't need mothers who act like fathers or fathers who act like mothers. And, I feel like there's a pattern that God set up when he created man and woman in Genesis, he said, have dominion. And dominion is the ability to exercise authority on behalf of others. So a woman, I still believe when it says the heart of her husband to safely trust in her, God is saying, I'm going to entrust women with the heart of man, heart of issue, heart of her home, heart of her children, heart of other women, heart of community. But what we've done is we've shut down some of the most compelling and beautiful and strong gifts that God has given women so that we could perform in a man's world. And I get it that women are leading as they've been led, but I think we need women to lead how God created women to lead. And when you see that woman in Proverbs 31, who everybody gets mad at, it says she considers the field and buys it. It doesn't say she considers the field and then asks her husband permission. She considers the field and buys it. And it says she plants a vineyard. Okay, but that's a long-term commitment. It says that she uses her influence to lift other people. And I would say to women, I get it that men have mistreated women, but you'll never look strong by making others look weak. And you'll never look godly by making other people look ungodly. And I think as women, we need to remember our very genesis is to take whatever we come in contact with and multiply it. It's our chromosome XX. Instead, we believe the lie of dividing and fracturing and denouncing. And yes, there's toxic men, but there's toxic women. But masculinity and femininity is not toxic in and of itself. So I think we need to remember about what God actually entrusted women with. I wrote a book many years ago called Fight Like a Girl, The Power of Being a Woman. I wrote it in 2005, and it's crazy. I said in that book, if we do not celebrate women for being women and men for being men, our culture will respond by blending the genders. Wow. And we're there right now. And that was in 2005. So, I believe that God has given strengths to women, and we need to know what that strength is.
Yeah, I think that's so good, Lisa. I think the corporate world is doing a good job of this. I just had a whole conversation with Katie Cole. I don't know if you know her, a few episodes back. She wrote a book called Developing Female Leaders, and she actually works with churches on how to do a better job of empowering female leaders and giving them a voice. Yeah, she's wonderful. I am curious, though, what would your message be, specifically in the church world, where, like you said, so many of the church leaders silence the voice of women when they're missing out on half of the body of Christ and the gifting that he gave them? What advice would you, or more, what advice would you give to kingdom leaders when it comes to actually empowering and giving voice to women?
Be patient. I think because you are going to get some reactionary, and they haven't had the decades and decades and decades of development that the men have had. John shared something with me that has proven to be brilliant. He said, Lisa, when you speak to men, he said, I'm going to tell you a little bit of what I experience when I sit under women. He said, some women, they're so kind and so gentle. They make me feel safe, but they don't grow me. And he said, then there's other ones, they challenge me, but I don't feel safe. He said, as a woman leader, you need to be able to challenge people to grow without making them feel unsafe. And I think that goes with all genders, but as women in particular, I think that we have this ability to call forth our sons and our daughters in the house into a place of greater strength. I do think that women are different than men, and I do think there's provision for that. You're talking about leading women in the church. I was flying, I think, from Houston to Boston one time, and I sat next to a guy who was one of the top execs in R&D for Exxon. And he was talking, I was complaining about gas prices. And then he was telling me about how hard it is for them to find these different pockets and how many times they search for it and they don't get it and stuff. And so I said, well, how many women are on your research and development team? You know what he said to me? He said, not enough. And I said, why not? And he said, they sabotage one another. And he said, the women come in and I need them to think different. I need them to think like women because all I've had is thinking like men. And he said, and they act like the men. And he said, then when I get more than one, they sabotage each other. So I think we need to get rid of the scarcity mindset. Tell them there's room for them to grow. And growth always includes mistakes. I told my husband, I said, if you get up and you preach a message, and even if you say something wrong, there's provision for you. If I get up and say something too strong, too whatever, I'm a Jezebel or I'm a witch. Or if I'm at a youth camp and I've got a sleeveless shirt on, I'm trying to be seductive. I said, it's a constant criticism, pressure on the women. And I think we need to have constructive conversations without condemnation. I wish every woman had a man like my husband that would say, wow, you know what, I'm going to let you speak and minister the way you do, and be unique to that. I have sons who are very systematic like John, and I have sons that are storytellers like me, and we need both of those in the body of Christ.
Yes. Oh, thank God for John in your life. I'm grateful for his voice and how he's empowered you. And thank you just for all that you've endured to be a voice for women and to invest in women's lives. I know that it's impacting women everywhere. Before we dive into the lightning round, is there anything else you'd want to say or talk about?
Yeah, just, I guess, to all the women, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to be tender. Don't push aside your intuition. I remember Albert Einstein said, I trust a woman's intuition before I trust a man's knowledge. And there's sometimes that sensing, the intuition is that sensing that partners with the Holy Spirit, and that tenderness has been lost. And I feel like we've lost a lot of protection as mothers. When you carry a child, you carry their DNA in you for the rest of your life. And when mamas have a sense about something, there's a reason for it. And I feel like, in the church, we need some mama sense.
So good. Well, thank you, Lisa. I want to dive into the lightning round. I try to ask a bunch of fun questions every interview. And because I have a New York Times best-selling author on the podcast, hey, you're getting asked a question because of this. But I am curious, anytime I interview an author who has had success, authoring books, I have to ask, there's thousands of aspiring authors listening, I'm sure. What advice do you have for people who want to write and publish?
Write what you know. Mm-hmm. You need to write something that is so woven inside of you that if any criticism comes or hardship comes, that you will be able to do it. And then you're going to get criticized. You always will, but you let your critics refine you, not define you. You can always say better. You can always have more clarity. I invite other people into the process, not opinions, as much as like, hey, what are you really struggling with right now? I would say consistently with all of my books, there's been chapters that the editors wanted to take out. And if I felt really strongly about them and I said, no, this needs to stay, it was really funny. They ended up being the chapters that people resonated the most with. So trust that.
Wow. What is the best advice you've ever received and who gave it to you?
It was an old Pentecostal female minister. She said to me, let your past be your teacher and let your future be your friend.
If you could put a quote on a billboard for everyone to read, what would it say?
That's a good one. I guess I would say, as you pursue him, he'll reveal you. I feel like too many people are trying to pursue themselves, and they need to pursue God. The more I know of him, the more he reveals me. So pursue him and he'll reveal you. I feel like we have a me generation right now that needs to deal with some of their idols.
You mentioned you loved reading. What's the best book you've read in the last year?
The last year. I know what I read. I loved. Hang on. It was the biography of Winston Churchill's wife. It was Miss Clementine.
Oh, wow. That sounds fascinating.
It was totally fascinating. See, I was like, I know I read a really good book.
No, that's great. You get to spend time with some people that God's using significantly throughout the earth. And I'm just curious, when you get an opportunity to spend with someone that you may admire or look up to, or at least respect how God's using them, do you have a go-to question or two that you always ask in that setting?
Yes. What is your greatest concern? And, like for the future of the body of Christ? And what is your greatest regret?
So I'll ask you both of those. What's your greatest concern about the future for the body of Christ?
My greatest concern is that the body of Christ is going to tear itself apart. I am concerned that God wants to do a new thing, and so many people are going to end up despising the very answers to their prayers.
Wow.
I just don't want us to be like the Pharisees when Jesus came. They didn't even recognize him because he didn't come how they wanted him to come. And that is a big concern for me. I don't like seeing how excited people are about being right about what is wrong. I don't like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then other question is, what's your biggest regret?
My biggest regret is that I didn't spend more time playing with my kids. I think, I mean, you'll understand this. I think when they were little, I survived them. but I wish I would have just gone down on the floor and played with them more. And to that end, I wish I would have played with my husband more too earlier on. I wish we would have just not cared about, not cared about tri-folding the underwear and bleaching the grout, and just let certain things go so that I could enjoy other things more.
Yeah, that's so good. You're actually, I interviewed a woman named Liz Wiseman, and she said the exact same thing, which has just stuck with me, but it's hard to actually execute on. It's just like, I wish I would have just sat down and seen things at their level more often. And so thank you again just for challenging me. When I get home tonight, it's like, focus. So I don't know if you have an actual bucket list or not, but what's something that you've done or crossed off your bucket list in your life that you think everyone should experience before they die?
Well, I got my Italian citizenship, and I'm learning the language of my father. And I think that sometimes we lose too much of our connection to the past. And my hope is that I will be able to take all of my children and my grandchildren back to Italy, and they'll be able to see where my father came from. My father came from dire poverty to the United States of America. He was born here, but his parents came over. And I feel like we lose too much of a connection to the history.
Wow. If you could go back and have coffee with yourself at any age, and you would have actually listened to yourself, what age would you have coffee with yourself, and what would you tell that version of Lisa?
Oh my gosh. I definitely would have caught the 35-year-old Lisa, and I would have told her, listen, stop trying to be friends with people that don't even like you. Like, really, you just need to stop it. I also would have told her to enjoy her husband. And same thing with the kids. Play with the kids, enjoy the kids. I would let her know that the people she's so worried about pleasing right now, they won't even be in her life in 5 years, that she will never be disappointed about being obedient to God and loving other people well. I would also tell her to be nicer to herself. I was very hard on myself. I grew up with a very hard to please father and mother. And so I was very hard on myself. And I just felt like every single night I went to bed as a young mother, I felt like I had this list of failures. Like,
Wow.
oh my gosh, I didn't put the laundry away. Oh my gosh, I yelled when I shouldn't have yelled. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. And then I would wake up weighed down every single morning of the mom list of failures. I would tell myself that I needed to experience the mercy of God and stop keeping a list against myself every single day.
It sounds like quite a coffee meeting. I'm 37. I'll take all that too. Last question is just at the other end of your life, at the end, what do you want to be remembered for? What do you want your legacy to be?
I want to be a woman who positioned the next generation to go further and farther. I want someone who passed on the lessons and not the pain. I want somebody who is known for speaking the truth in love and living the truth in love. And I want to see my children flourish in the areas where we failed.
Wow. Well, thank you for everything. I think you're well on your way to securing that legacy. Thank you for investing in me for the past hour. I've loved this conversation. Thank you for investing in everyone who will listen to this. And again, I'll include links to all of your ministries and books on the podcast show notes. But really encourage you, if you haven't, connect with Lisa and John. They're a wonderful ministry and doing incredible things. So thanks again, Lisa.
Doug, it was an incredible honor.
Well, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Lisa. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with her and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/361. And as always, leader, I want to challenge you that if you want to 10x your growth this year, then you need to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups are groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together for at least 1 year in order to help each other grow, hold each other accountable, and to do life together. For me personally, mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 8 years. So if you're interested in learning more about launching or joining a group, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds or email me at dougsmith@l3leadership.org. And as always, I like to end every episode with a quote, and I'll quote Jeremy Pryor, who said this about family. He said, "Remember, your boss thinks you're replaceable. Your sons and daughters do not, and both are right." So good, leaders. Make sure that you are leading well at home. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Know that my wife, Laura, and I love you. We believe in you, and we say it every episode, but don't quit. Keep leading. The world desperately needs your leadership. We'll talk to you next episode.